For 20 years, a French diplomat believed he was living with the woman of his dreams, but he did not know that the person he loved the most was not a woman. They had a great relationship. They even had a child. He sent her money, took care of her, and built his whole future around her. Somewhere along the way, he began passing French government documents to her because he thought he was protecting the person he loved. In 1983, Bernard Boursicot was arrested, and when doctors examined the person he had spent 20 years trusting, they told him something that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. The person he loved was not a woman. He had never been one, and Bernard had never realized it. This is a true story, and it may be one of the strangest spies and espionage stories of the Cold War. The story begins in Beijing on Christmas Day, 1964. Bernard Boursicot was only 20 years old, and he was working as an accountant at the French embassy. He was young, far from home, and living in a country where almost everything around him was unfamiliar and exotic. Then he met Shi Pei Pu, and this is when his life started taking a dramatic turn. She was 26, a performer trained in Beijing opera, a tradition famous for male performers playing female characters with extraordinary precision. They had mastered the voice, the movement, the gestures, the appearance, and the illusion of being women. Bernard was captivated and intrigued. They talked for hours, and eventually, their relationship grew to become something deeper. But Shi had a secret. Shi told him that she had actually been born a woman, but since her family had wanted a son so desperately, she had been raised as a boy. Bernard believed her, and he had no reason not to. This was China in the 1960s. Bernard was a young foreigner living in a tightly controlled society. There was no easy way for him to verify what he was being told. There was another reason he never discovered the truth. Their physical encounters happened in near darkness. She explained that their intimacy had to be modest and in line with their culture. And Bernard did not question this, and so he never really saw what he would have needed to see. Years passed and the lie became normal. But things were about to take a major shift. In 1965, Shi told Bernard she was pregnant. For the better part of the year, Bernard was stationed elsewhere because of his work, and when he eventually returned, there was a beautiful baby boy waiting for him as the father. The baby had been named Shi Du, and without question, Bernard believed that this was his son. For years, he would go on to provide for his partner and child as he imagined a blossoming future with his family. And this is where the story starts to change. While Bernard was falling deeper into the relationship, something else was happening. Classified documents were moving, and information from the French embassy was making its way into Shi's hands. This may have looked innocent at first, but do not forget. This was during the Cold War era, where spying and espionage was the rule of the game. The documents Shi, Bernard's wife, received, or rather stole, were passed on to the Chinese intelligence. For nearly 2 decades, Bernard was providing information without fully understanding what he was doing. He wasn't operating like a traditional spy who met handlers in dark alleys, and he wasn't being paid to betray his country. He was simply a man helplessly in love. By the early 1980s, French counterintelligence began questioning and connecting the dots. They started wondering how the Chinese seemed to be always a step ahead in terms of intelligence. They started auditing their personnel. They found out that Bernard and Shi had been together for almost 2 decades. They started investigating secretly, and soon enough, they found out that classified information had been moving through their relationship. Eventually, the French authorities acted, and in 1983, the 2 lovers were arrested. But Bernard still didn't know the most important secret. Even after all those years, he still believed Shi was the woman he had fallen in love with. This was to change when he was in custody after doctors examined Shi Pei Pu. Imagine the shock on Bernard when he realized that Shi Pei Pu was actually a man. He had always been a man. Try to imagine what that meant for Bernard. It meant that 20 years of memories suddenly had to be reinterpreted. The person he believed was his partner wasn't who he thought, and the child he believed was his son wasn't his biological child. The relationship that had shaped 2 decades of his life had also been connected to espionage, and for 20 years, this deception had worked like magic. This revelation broke Bernard. While in custody, he attempted to take his own life by cutting his throat with a razor blade. He did not die, and was about to go onto a trial of his life. In 1986, both Shi Pei Pu and Bernard Boursicot were convicted of espionage and each received a 6-year sentence. But they would not serve it all, as the following year, in 1987, both were pardoned and released. Shi remained in Paris and continued performing and eventually lived a relatively quiet life. He would go on to die in a Paris nursing home in 2009 at the age of 70. When a journalist later contacted Bernard for a reaction after Shi's death, his response was brutally cold. He said there was no point pretending to grieve for someone who had spent 20 years lying to him. The story became so extraordinary that it eventually inspired David Henry Hwang's Tony Award-winning Broadway play, M. Sir Butterfly, which was later adapted into a film starring Jeremy Irons.